Good evening and welcome to all as we gather once again to bask in the brilliance of literary and enchanting world of conversations. I, Shinjini Kulkarni, Ehsas woman of Noida, deem it my distinct pleasure to welcome each one of you to yet another exquisite literary story hosted by Prabha Khaitan Foundation under its initiative The Right Circle. It is an evening, as you all know, dedicated to an enchanting conversation circling around the life and works of a distinguished author and conversationalist. And today it is my pleasure to welcome Manjari Jaruharji for the evening. Please give her a big round of applause. Today's session is in association with the Cannot as the hospitality partner and Sai Shinjini Academy of Fine Arts and Culture with the support of Ehsas Women. The media partner for today's event is Dainik Jagran. Before an insightful conversation unfurls, allow me to talk a few words about Prabha Khaitan Foundation. The foundation has a colossal presence as an organization which encourages and promotes literary and cultural heritage of India. Charting a glorious 40-year journey, the foundation has relentlessly endeavored to create boutique events to showcase the prized assets of literature and cultural heritage pan-India and on the global map with a niche audience with finer experiences. Amazing initiatives allow PKF to create the cultural capital. To widen the community and social spectrum, the foundation leaves no stone unturned to exchange cross-city mementos, treat chief guests and audience to taste the local authentic cuisine, and appreciate the handloom and sculptures of local artisans to show appreciation to the esteemed personalities. The Trust is committed to 13 out of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals set by the United Nations. To create awareness in the community, we uphold one pressing social issue every month. We are elated to share that 3 times Grammy Award winner Ricky Kedge, the man behind the anthem and signature caller tune of Prabha Khaitan Foundation, has curated 12 amazing musical pieces to score across video invites of events and social media platforms, as well as for pan-India and overseas communication. This June, on the occasion of World Environment Day, we unite under the theme of Our Land, Our Future. Let's take the action to restore our land, combat desertification, build resilience against drought. Together, we can create a sustainable future for generations to come. Join us in supporting the environment and making a lasting impact. Before we move further, it is my utmost pleasure to introduce the star of the evening, our star author Manjari Jaruharji. A few words about her. Miss Manjari Jaruhar is one of the first 5 women police officers in India and the first from the state of Bihar. Miss Jaruhar retired as Special Director General of the Central Industrial Security Force, CISF. She was selected for the Indian Police Services, the elite crime prevention and law enforcement cadre of the Indian Civil Service in 1976 and has held positions in the state governments of Bihar and Jharkhand, the National Police Academy, NPA, the CISF and the CRPF. She has led teams in a wide range of complex and challenging assignments that have prepared her for a career in the private and social sector. From fighting crime to administering a massive organization, Ms. Jaruhar has shown exemplary leadership in a domain traditionally dominated by men. She is the recipient of the Government of India's Police Medal for Meritorious Service and the President's Police Medal for Distinguished Service. She was awarded the Director General's Commendation Disc for Outstanding Service twice in the CISF and once when she was with the CRPF. Please give a round of applause for our so decorated author for today. And with her in conversation today, we have Miss Chandni Chopra, Ehsas Woman of Agra. She is a writer herself and writes both poetry and prose. Without much ado, I give it to Chandni ji to start the conversation we have all been waiting for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Injini, for that very gracious introduction. Welcome, ma'am. What an honor to be in conversation with you today. Ma'am, your book's just launched, Madam Sir, and I have binge read this book in 2 days. I'm not lying about that. And you've grown up in an era which was very different from what we live in now. You grew up at a time in Bihar in the 1960s where Victorian conservatism was paramount, and you were essentially being trained to become a housewife to become a lady. And from that, you've transformed your journey into becoming Madam Sir. Take us through your growing up years, please.
Thank you, Chandni, and thank you, Prabha Khaitan Foundation, for having this event for me. I'm really honored that you all have organized a very nice event, and I hope that the conversation today you enjoy, and we have a nice round of question answers in case from the audience. So, about my growing up years, I think I was a very sheltered child. So much so that my parents were mostly very busy in the village, and it was my grandparents who really brought me up. And as all grandparents, I was very strictly brought up. There was no question of going out for movies or going to restaurants or going anywhere. It was all about studies, learning manners, dressing properly, behaving properly, and no interaction at all with men or cousins or friends or male friends. So it was extremely sheltered. I had no experience of doing any physical activity. Whenever in college, I mean, school, my friends have come from school, they would remember that I was considered a very delicate child. And whenever there was a physical training class, my grandfather, who was a doctor, would write and say that she's unwell, please do not put her through this class. So this was the way I was brought up, extremely sheltered, very shy, and I did well in my college. I did well in my senior Cambridge school class exams, and I was supposed to go to Delhi and study in Lady Irwin College. Those days it was considered a very prestigious college. And there was a lot of excitement among my friends also that I was going. But a day before I was to leave for the university, my fees had been paid for 6 months, my hostel had been arranged, everything was in place, and I was looking forward to joining there. And then my father comes to my grandmother and says that, इसको समझाओ, because अभी जाएगी तो इसकी विदाई ही हो जाएगी. So that was the done thing, you know. I have a person from Bhagalpur, and she also knows how sheltered girls were, and all decisions were taken by the parents. We had no choice. So finally, when things didn't turn out the way my parents had planned, and I had a chance to take my own decision, I decided that I'll take the civil services exams. And when I took the civil services exams, at luck would have it, I qualified for the IPS. My father was really horrified. He felt that, you know, how can I do a daroga's job? I have written in the book, how can I do a daroga's job? Because he had no idea that what this IPS was. Even I did not know what the IPS was, except that I had heard about Kiran Bedi, that she had already qualified in 72. But my father did not believe at all that I should go to a police ki naukri. So then it so happened that some relatives came who were already IPS officers, and then they told my father that, what is bothering you? It is a very, very safe journey. She will always be protected. There will be always people around her. And Kiran Bedi has already marched on the Rajpath. That year she had marched on the Rajpath. And because she is there, why don't you allow her to go? So finally my father relented, and he sent me to the police academy only to see the academy and come back. He still never thought that I should go there. And those days there was these horrible stories going around that parade घंटों होता है, लड़कियां भाग जाती हैं academy से, people have opted out of the IPS and all. There were these stories circulating. But I was very pleasantly surprised when I arrived at the police academy, and at the training center. First we arrived in Nagpur, that there were 6 girls in my batch, and there were 110 boys. So I sent a telegram to my father saying that 6 girls, and I think that why he understood. And recently my father is no more, and I was cleaning his cupboard, and I found that he had still preserved that telegram, you know. So it was a very nostalgic thing for me to see that 76 May, that letter, that telegram which I had sent, he had very carefully preserved it. But this is what parents are all about.
Manjari ji, also, during your the entire book, when I was reading your book, There's this thing that you've mentioned time and again, that no education goes for waste.
Yes.
And you have trained for various things, including singing, cooking, sewing, everything.
Everything
And
which a girl can do.
can do. And also during your interview in the UPSC, that's a very interesting anecdote actually, that the question that they asked you and how your entire life came about, because who could have thought that taking cooking classes could actually earn you a spot as an officer?
Yes. After that incident, I have realized that no education in life has ever got wasted. In fact, it has been true for me. I think it is very true. And whenever I have addressed younger officers, who don't want to go for training or who don't want to do a special course, they are reluctant to do it. I've always told them that even if you pick up one idea there, it will be worth it. The training will be worth it. So in my when I finished school, 6 months there used to be a gap, if you remember earlier, from senior Cambridge. So that time my father said that you should go and study at you should go and learn cooking from Balbir Singh. She was the doyen in those days. So every morning at 7:30 in the morning in winter, I would go and attend her classes religiously. She would every day teach 3 dishes. One would be a starter soup, one will be a main dish, and one will be a pudding. So, and those days you didn't get mayonnaise and all in bottles, like you can go and buy anything out of the shelf. So very painstakingly she taught us how to make mayonnaise. And when I went back to Patna, my sisters, my parents would often ask me to make the mayonnaise. और friends के लिए भी मैं बना देती थी कभी कभी. So I knew exactly what has to be done. And lo and behold, that in my interview, who sits in my interview but this now what would be called a food blogger? She was there, Amita Malik. She was so famous in those days. And very, I would say, I should not use the word arrogantly, she says, what do you cook? She must have thought ये क्या खाना बना सकती है. So I said I cook continental food. So she says, can you tell me one dish which you like cooking? So I said I can make very good Russian salad. And then she said, can you tell me the recipe of mayonnaise? Then my luck, I could tell her drop by drop how to make a mayonnaise. And now I don't make mayonnaise at home, I buy from the market. But drop by drop how the olive oil and the egg and this has to be dropped into the sauce and whisked all the time. So I think she got quite taken aback that I knew this. And that's how I feel that no knowledge ever gets wasted.
Absolutely. So I think all of us here also, every experience that we're gaining now, I'm very positive it's going to help us in some way or the other.
Oh, sure, sure.
Also, during your growing up years, we see in your story that you had a very sheltered upbringing, and your father was also, in a way, a stern patriarch, I would say, that he would take decisions for you and everything. But there was a point in your life where you came back after you were married off initially,
Yes.
and you came back and you broke down in front of your parents. And that time, your father put down his foot and he told you that I'm not sending you back and you're going to stay here with us. So, do you feel in a way that the father in him, the compassion in the father, took over the sternness in the patriarch? And that was probably the turning point in your life as well. Do you feel if you did not get that support, that you would have probably been on a different path?
Yeah, I think my father was a very strong influence in my life. And if I have said that he didn't allow me to do this, he didn't allow me to do this, it was not because of anything else, but that extreme possessiveness and this desire to care for the child. We were 3 sisters. So he always felt that he should shelter us, we should be properly brought up. I don't think he was a cruel father or he was like a tyrant. I didn't mean to say that. He was an extremely caring person, and he always thought that the daughter was such a delicate child, she should be brought up in a particular way. But as she has said that I was married very early in my life because 3 sisters, so घर में बहुत pressure था, शादी शादी शादी. I have friends here who got married at the age of 15 and 16, and so it was just out of college. College barely started in first year when my marriage was fixed. How it was fixed, how it happened, it was just the flow. A decision is taken that your marriage is fixed. You are informed that this is the man you are supposed to marry, and you hardly get to meet the person, or he gets to see me, but I don't get to do ask any questions or see anything. So for some reason the marriage did not work out, and it is still a mystery to me why it did not work out. And I've written very extensively about it in the book also, that I have never understood what was expected from me or what my in-laws expected from me. So then but when I came back, my college education had still not finished. I was still studying. And my friends will tell you that our BA exams went on and on and on for 4 years. Those were the days of the JP movement. 9 months our exams went on. So I was there, and then my father took this call that I will not send you back. And he did not make a secret of it, which now I think he did such a bold thing. He wrote to all the relatives in the family and friends that she's come back and I'm not sending her back. So I think that was a very bold decision. And then I took the decision that I will take the civil services. That was the first time I think I defied my father, if you can say it in inverted commas, that I defied my father. I said, no, I will not study in Patna. I will go to Delhi University and study. And I enrolled myself on my own at Rao Study Circle. My father was not even there when I just went to Rao Study Circle and enrolled myself. So that is the story. And then,
And
I
all
didn't
this
look
while
back.
your divorce proceedings were happening.
My divorce proceeding. That was being handled by my father and partly by me.
My God, but
Yeah.
there's so much chatter about mental health in today's environment. Back in
Yes.
the day, there was no awareness of mental health also. And there you were crumbling under this divorce, the proceedings, and then you were dealing with the kind of society you all were growing up in at that time. But
Yes.
yet there was this very undying grit and determination in you, and you took everything in your stride. So I'm sure the support system would have been impeccable at that time for you, or was it an internal strength that you garnered through your own experience, and what was it?
I think my father's and my parents' support was very important, and my sisters, they all supported me. And I also think that when I felt that things have not worked out, I felt very strongly about the fact that now it is for me to do whatever I want. Because then everything would come back, that I wanted to go to study in Delhi University, it didn't happen. I wanted to study geography honors. My father said, you can't go to a boys' college for education. All my friends here used to go to Patna University to study, but I was denied. My father said, no, you can't go to a boys' college and study. And then I was never interested in English literature. He said that only English literature is available in the college, and that's what you should study.
But even your
Sorry, that I should study only English literature. So then I think that whole thing, I felt that, ab kya hai, what is it? I should do things on my own. There was that defiance. So, but in that defiance, my father made sure that everything was made available to me when I was studying in Delhi. He sent a car and a driver and would not let me shift to a hostel. I would stay with my uncle till one day I decided that I was wasting so much time in commuting from one end of Delhi to the other end of the Delhi. So then I moved to the hostel, and I think that was another wise decision, because my eyes really opened to the wide world in what was happening in Delhi University, what girls were doing, what they were achieving, whereas we had been like in a nest all the time, in a nest.
one can imagine, Manjari ji, that while you were prepping for UPSC, it couldn't have been easy. I mean, I'm sure you must have faced many adversities. There's an incident, in fact, where you mentioned that Bihar was hit by floods on the day when you had to go write an exam, and you took a boat actually to go and write an
Yes,
exam.
yes.
I mean, what was that like? I'm sure a lot of people would just give up at the idea. I mean, I literally halfway through coming in the traffic, I gave up. I thought, no, I don't think so, I'm going to make it. I was going to take my questions and message Chetna that please take over. And here you are taking a boat and going and writing an exam.
Yes, that floods came in 1974, I think, 75. And my house downstairs was completely submerged. We were perched upstairs. Everybody was upstairs. And then I had no place to study because we were all cramped in 2 bedrooms. So then I talked to UPSC, and they said that they will change my center. My father then arranged for a boat and one of his clerks in his office, and the clerk and I boarded this boat with all my books, and I came to Delhi. And another incident, of course, you can't write so much in a book, but near Koilwar, somebody from Bihar will remember Koilwar bridge jahan tha, wahan pe somebody stole all his belongings. Fortunately, my books were not stolen. I only thank God that it was not stolen, but somebody came, maybe we had gone to sleep or whatever, and all his belongings, his clothes, and everything of that escort who was going with me, my father's clerk, his belongings were all stolen now that I remember that, you know. So, yes, it was a challenging thing to take a decision to move out.
During your training process, at that time, not many women took up the services as a career option. And I believe there were just 4 or 5 odd women colleagues in your
Six.
batch. Did you at any point feel that the training was not all encompassing of all genders? Did you feel that now in hindsight, when you look back, do you feel that probably the training and everything should be made in a way which is a little more inclusive to women as well? And do you feel that has changed over years?
No, the IPS training for women has not changed at all, because this service is guaranteed by the Constitution, and it's an all India service. So the syllabus, the training, and all is decided at the highest level in the Ministry of Home Affairs. So there is no change in our uniform. Even our shoes, the eyelets of the shoes have to be 5 eyelets. The buttons above my belt has to be 4 buttons. The cuff of my shirt has to be of a particular inches. So nothing is different for the women. So we do exactly the same training from morning to evening as a man does, because then our seniority, everything is inter se. So, and the women have resisted, and we are always very grateful to Kiran Bedi, who was the first woman officer, that she could have asked for anything at that point of time, any concession, but she never ever asked for any concession. She said, no, whatever the men are doing, we'll do. And that trend continued with us. All of us also felt that there were a lot of demand for changing our uniform. But I think the day the uniform is changed for women IPS officers, they will be relegated to the back. So we have all said that no, we should be at par. We should not be different.
Do you feel that there should be some difference probably in the syllabus or something? So that, because it's so tough, one can imagine.
Yes, it is one of the toughest training, I think, and there is nothing which you should not do. Like I have some CISF officers also with me here. They all do a very tough training themselves. So if you have to climb the rope, I could climb the rope a little bit, but I couldn't get down. You have to do pull-ups. I could pull myself up, but I could not pull myself down. So these things happen, and you lose marks. You lose marks because certain things you can't do. But what I found was that in the beginning it was very, very tough. The first day when they tell you to take a round of the parade ground, I thought my entire system will come out. And but the consolation is that the men are also going through that process, because you know, to qualify for these civil services exams or these competitive exams, you need brains and not brawn. It is just the brains, how much you have studied and how competitively you have taken the exam, that matters. It is only later on that the training puts you through this. So if my ankle was swollen, so were the men who were training with me, their ankle was also swollen. If I fell off the horse, the men were also falling off the horse. So it was okay, it was an equalizer.
But it wasn't an equalizer, because alternatively, the men were all given field job postings and you were given a desk job. You were posted with the CID.
Yes.
So that must have shaken your confidence, because you're going through all the arduous training and you're doing everything that,
Yes.
that another man is doing. But when it came to the posting, your takeaway was not rightful until you spoke about it.
Yes, that is what was those were the challenges of a woman's career, that you do the same training at par, and when you arrive at the state, they start discriminating you. Now that all has changed. It was only because we were the first few. Now the numbers are so many that they cannot afford not to put a woman in the same job as a man. That time when I came and reported to Bihar, I was the first woman. I was so excited. But when I entered the DG's room, he did not even look up. He did not even look at my face. He kept seeing the file, and after some time he got up and said, he put his head up and said, "Oh, you have come. And what am I going to do with you? This is not Delhi. Kiran Bedi is working in Delhi. This is Bihar. You will find it very difficult. Anyway, wait, I'll do the posting." So my other male colleagues, 5 of them, including my husband, was posted out that day, and I had to keep waiting. And finally, everybody was given a field job, which is essential in the first posting, and I was given a small, dingy cubicle where there was hardly any light to sit there the whole day. There were hardly any files coming to me, but I am not one who gives up. By then, I was determined that I've done this training the same as the men. I've done everything along with the men, so why am I being discriminated against? So I kept on and on and on and kept saying that I should be given a field posting, my career will get finished. And eventually they had to post me, but after 6 months of after others being. So that discrimination is there. But in the training, there is no discrimination.
So, what was your first field job posting like? What was your experience then? Did you miss the office? Did you feel no, the desk job was better, or were you happy?
No,
with the
I
field
thought
post?
that the field job is really challenging, and I thought that if I don't do a field job, then I could see that next 30, 35 years I'll be just sitting in this dingy kind of jobs. So when I joined my posting, my senior SP was not happy that I had been posted there, and. I was posted in Danapur, yes, as an SDPO. That is the first posting. So my senior SP was not too happy. The local MLA opposed it, said that why have you posted a lady officer in my constituency? Please remove her and all. And the challenge was that immediately after my joining, the day I joined, there was a very bad murder, and after a month, there was a very bad bus dacoity. And bus dacoities had just started happening in Bihar. It was not a very common thing. It was my luck that I managed to detect both those cases. It was just my luck and hard work, I think. And then that established my reputation for hard work and sincerity. The DG called me and congratulated me, gave me a letter of appreciation, because that was the first bus dacoity in Bihar which was solved. There had been a spate of bus dacoities, but none of them had been solved. It was the first case which was solved in Bihar. So then he really appreciated everything. But the DG by then had changed, and he was a much more an amenable person, maybe because he had daughters himself, that her daughter was also a batchmate of ours. So maybe that helped, but he felt that women should be given their due if they have trained. And he did not discriminate. That was a very big thing.
But during your years of service, did you feel at many incidences that there was a push down just because you were a woman, and at many steps people did not want to give you your rightful due?
Yes, I think the first 8 years of my service was very hard because I had to plow my way through. Every time there was a pushback. After I finished my subdivision, all my colleagues got posted as SPs of districts, but I was posted back to CID. Oh, subdivision ho gaya, district is very difficult for a woman. So again I was pushed to the CID. There again I didn't give up. I kept on working there. Whatever little files would come, some very important cases I was able to investigate, which doesn't happen to everybody. I investigated those cases, and the chief minister called me and he says that any case against a woman now you should investigate. So many state cases started coming in for my investigation, and I kept insisting district, because now if you don't do a district in your career, then you will never get a field job. So then they posted me to Bokaro. And that was an interesting, very 3 full years I was there. I got a chance to do a lot of work there. But after my posting at Bokaro, I was selected for the National Police Academy. And that was the turning point in my career. I think after that, I did not look back.
Speaking about when you were SP Bokaro, I think the Bhagalpur blindings happened around that time?
No, it happened when I was in the CID.
When you were in the CID.
And that again, I have written that education doesn't get wasted, because I was good at report writing because of my English literature education. And I was a spare SP, no, but I had hardly any jobs. So when the Bhagalpur blindings took place, you must be familiar with that, then I was drafted in that committee only because they thought that ये hard working है, file ठीक से पढ़ेगी, सब कुछ ठीक से लिखेगी. So I was drafted, and that was a big experience for me. It was a huge experience to see what is right and wrong in the police. I read, I don't know how many FIRs I must have read, how many police diaries I read, case diaries I read. So it gave me a whole picture of what is happening around Bihar and how we have to do policing actually, and what is right, what is wrong. And then finally, when I got selected for the police academy, then that was a big breakthrough in my career.
But what was the ground reality during those blindings? Because you also mentioned that the civilians were actually in support of the officers who were carrying out these blindings. So sometimes I feel it can also be a gray area when it comes to law and order.
No, there is nothing like a gray area in police. I think it is always right or wrong. And Bhagalpur was having a spate of crime and very heinous crimes. Rape in front of the family, chopping of hands, cutting a body in pieces and throwing it in the Ganga, kidnapping a person and taking the ransom and still killing him. So all these cases were taking place in Bhagalpur, and it could not be controlled because there were these gangs operating in Bhagalpur. So the police came out with this novel method of blinding the criminals. They would arrest the criminals, bring them to the police station and gouge out their eyes and pour acid. I have really not understood why they did this. It is better to bump off that person than to leave living evidence. They had left this evidence around that, you can see that something has happened. Now, the police records are in such a way that one thing leads to the other. So when this man comes to the police station, he's healthy. They have to record that I have brought a person who's a criminal and I've put him in the lockup. Within 24 hours, he has to be moved to the jail. When he goes to the jail, there the doctor records that he has got grievous injuries in his eyes. So then what is the conclusion? That those grievous injuries has happened in the police station. So this is the way the police tied up their hands. And I personally think that senior police officers also turned a blind eye to what was being done because they could not control crime. And I would not blame the police for not being able to control crime. They would arrest people, send them to jail, and they would get bail. You see? Because they would threaten the judges also. So what can, it's a helpless kind of a situation when it is like in a vicious circle is formed. So then they started blinding. One night there was a bus dacoity and they blinded 9 people. They blinded 9 people, and that is the time the bubble burst. And when we arrived in Bhagalpur, Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister. She said she was ashamed of what was happening. Immediately a committee was formed to look into it as the government decides. So then I was part of that committee with a senior DIG. And when we arrived, the entire town was shouting slogans against us. Go back. They were on side of the police. They were against us. So that moral dilemma was there because now you are investigating your own colleagues and people who have been working with you. And so much so that my own PA, his brother, young brother, 24 years old, he was the officer in charge of that police station which had blinded 9 people. और मेरा पैर पकड़ लेता था कि मैडम मेरे भाई को बचा दीजिए. हाउ कैन यू सेव अ मैन लाइक दिस कि एक रात में 9 persons had been blinded. These were horrible things, and these kind of cases actually shake you up. What is it that you are there for? What are you delivering? What have you been competing in this tough exam for? What are the expectations? A whole lot of questions comes to your mind that how do you handle these kind of emotions? There is a woman who has been raped and her body parts have been chopped. And here is a man whose brother, young brother, 24 years old, who's going to get guillotined because he blinded 9 people. So these are the dilemmas, very often police officers have.
In your tenure, which has been the most heinous crime that you've witnessed? And was there a moment where you just wanted to probably give up on this as a career because it was just too much to take in?
Yes, there was this case which, if you want, I can read it out. Yeah, sure. There was this case in Danapur when I was an ASP. It really affected me. And recently I was at another book event, and there was a panel discussion with lawyers and all, and I narrated this incident last year. And somebody in the crowd got up and said that, Madam, you have written about it, that it happened in 1980, but even today this is prevalent in India. So that is still shocking, that we have changed, yet we have not changed. So I'll read one small extract. I will not make it very long, but just to depict our dilemmas and how things posted as ASP Danapur. A girl had died in her in-laws' home and they were taking the body to the river to dispose it of, either by cremating it or dumping it in the water. I immediately headed for Behta, that Behta is a police station, giving instructions over the wireless to the officer in charge to immediately proceed towards the river. We had to stop them before they could got rid of the body, thereby destroying the most crucial evidence. The officer in charge arrived at the river bank just in time to interrupt the funeral procession. Abandoning the lady, everybody ran away. Now we had another problem. The body of the girl had suffered severe burns and it was sent for post-mortem. Even though people said that she had been killed with the in-laws, but nobody was ready to lodge an FIR. This is very common. The girl was originally from Gaya district. I sent a team to Gaya to bring her parents, and then the parents were brought, and they showed me letters that spoke of a young woman's dashed dreams, of the depth of human greed and the harsh reality awaiting many girls in our country who are married off with neither education nor economic independence. The girl came from a very poor family. They have murdered our daughter because we could not satisfy their greed for more dowry. The parents wept bitterly. They lodged an FIR and we proceeded with the case. Throughout the career, the plight of women, especially when they have fallen victim to our patriarchal society and cruel practices, have had a profound impact on me. It was at the eyes of those girls haunted me, spurring me to seek justice on their behalf. If anybody is wronged even today and they come to me with some saying that, my husband is behaving like this, it really affects me. I feel that I should intervene, I should help that woman or that girl. I get often people who will come and share their grief with me. It affects me, and even then it used to bother me that what is it that I can do. Acting on the parents' FIR, I arrested everybody in the husband's family. They said the girl had committed suicide. Alternatively, that her clothes has accidentally caught fire while cooking. So then I started looking into the FIR and the investigation of this case, and it was going on. Then one day, the girl's parents came to me with folded hands and started pleading with me to close the case. I suspected the family of the accused was threatening them into submission. Or being poor and old, they were too scared to pursue the case. I told them that their daughter's memory deserved justice and assured them that no harm would come to them. I thought that they were scared. What they said to me left me stunned to my core. Nahi, no, we have come to withdraw our complaint because they have agreed to marry their son to our second daughter. Yeah, that was a very, very. So we want to put this case behind us and take them out of jail. Of course, as a professional, I could not allow not allow the course of justice to be derailed. I told them I could not withdraw the case as it was a case of murder. All these decades later, I still remember that old man standing before me with palms folded, tears streaming down his face, begging me not to prosecute his murderous son-in-law because they had agreed to marry another of his daughters. Always full of fiery talk about seeking justice for the downtrodden, I was numbed into silence that day. In the face of abject poverty of the old couple with an unmarried daughter, I had no words. In that moment, the IPS uniform felt meaningless. I wanted to take it off and throw it away. So these are emotions, which hits a woman officer, I think. That when you see this happening, maybe a man will react differently. But this was my reaction. What can I do? And why should I not do?
And this is exactly why we need more women officers like you in the force, for sure.
Yes, we are having more and more women these days doing
Yes.
equally well.
Also, when you were SP Bokaro at that time, the anti-Sikh riots had taken place.
Yes.
And during those few days, you were away in Bombay.
Yes,
And
I
when
was
you-
away in Bombay.
And when you came back, you very beautifully mentioned that you left a very beautiful, happy city and you came back to a city which was down with curfew and everything was shut out and there was violence on the road. So how did you equip yourself with these sudden changes in the environment, and how did you manage your family? And you had 2 kids by that time. So that would have been a struggle, I'm sure.
Yes, those were tough days. I had gone to Bombay for a short holiday, and during that during that holiday, when I was in Bombay, Mrs. Gandhi was assassinated, and immediately the next day there were riots. Now I'll take you back to 1984, when we had no planes flying from one place to another. We didn't have WhatsApp. We didn't have mobile phones. You only had these STD calls. So nobody was in a position to give me any information, but I was to leave on the 2nd, and I left. Throughout this journey with these two small kids, it was horrifying because all the stations had been devastated, they had been burnt down, and the train was going, and there was no food or anything available. When I arrived in Bokaro, the army jeep had come to receive me, and then I asked them what has happened. I was told there was curfew. I couldn't believe this. When I arrived in the town, it was completely deserted, and then I heard that people had been killed, families had been all sheltered. The DIG had taken charge, and he had sheltered all the families in the school there, because the school were closed for the Dashera holidays and things like that. It was after Dashera. So Chhat Puja ke baad, everything was closed. So they had shifted the families to the this Saint Xavier school. So my immediate thing was to change and leave immediately for the school. And there I saw hundreds of families, and they started clinging to me and saying that you had gone and see what has happened. It was a very peculiar reaction. I was expecting that people would be angry with me, but it was just the other way around. They were clinging to me and looking for succor when I did not know how to handle this emotion. There was a woman who told me that 9 people had been thrown from the top floor onto the ground. And I started crying myself because I felt, can you imagine 9 male members being thrown down like that? So my first reaction, I must say that our police training is really a very, very good training and a very tough training. So I knew exactly what I have to do. The first thing I did was that I told the district magistrate, please don't remove curfew. We want to keep the curfew for 2 days so that everybody is confined to their homes. And we called all the officers in charge and started saying that pehle FIR karo, so that we know the extent of the damage and where are people, where are they. There were boys missing, there were girls missing, there were families trapped somewhere. So 2 days, we got the FIR in the morning. By evening, we would start rounding up all the people who were involved in the case. So within 2-3 days, people knew that we were going to take action, and a whole lot of people were rounded up. So that gave a lot of confidence to the people, and within about a week and all, the Sikh families are very resilient and they are very helpful. So they came and started taking charge of these families, and there were many incidents about which I have written in the book. But those were very tough days, very, very tough days to discover families, recover children from some place, bring them home, bring them to the parents. So I don't know, families must have gone through a lot of trauma in those days.
After all this, being posted at the NPA as a faculty member would have brought in some relief, one can imagine. And you also mentioned that those are one of the best years of your life.
Yes. I think that I said as in the beginning that the first 8 years was always being a pushback. So because of my performance in Bokaro Steel Plant, Bokaro Steel City, I was selected for the National Police Academy based on my record, because they also wanted a lady officer in Delhi, in the National Police Academy. So when I arrived there, suddenly my horizon changed. I was on an all India level. I was interacting with police officers who came to address IPS officers, trainee IPS officers. I would be traveling with IPS officers. I was doing their counseling. So in those 5 years, I trained almost 500 plus IPS probationers. So, and then traveled everywhere in the country to see what was happening. So I became familiar with what is happening in the Northeast, what is happening in Kashmir, what are the problems of South. So every state almost I traveled. And that made me realize that in Bihar, I would have gone from one district to another. Usi mein hum pade rehte. But here, my horizon changed. I was interacting with all the senior officers of the country who came to address IPS officers. And very often we would have discussions with them. We would know how they have tackled things in their problem. If there's a one famous police officer, Mr. K. Rustamji, he came to address the probationers. I had a long talk with him. He was fascinated to see a lady training IPS officers. So there was a lot of give and take with them. So I think and then I have not looked back. After my police academy training, in this academy training IPS officers, I did not look back. I did not even ever have to ask for a posting. Like I had to earlier keep on saying posting kariye, posting kariye. I was always called. And I think that I'm very fortunate that my work was always appreciated, and my seniors, hearing my reputation, would ask me to come and join at a particular place.
You also worked very closely with the CM of Bihar back then.
Yes, with Mr. Lalu Prasad Yadav. Yes.
How was your experience working with him?
Everybody has been asking me. I've done so many podcasts and all. Everybody has asked about Lalu Prasad Yadav, and it is a fact. But please remember that I was working with Lalu Prasad Yadav in 1992 when he had just arrived. And at that time, as I have said in many podcasts, he was like a messiah. He was bringing up a new kind of politics into the country, and people respected him. They felt that he was doing so much for the depressed classes, and his approach to everything was very different from what we see now. Now when we see things have become so much mired in controversy, and so many things have happened, and the fodder scam, this scam, that time. But at that time, it was not like that. He was doing very well. He was a very hands-on person. He knew what is to be done. The Babri Masjid incident had just taken place when I was DIG Patna. He could tell us that this is what has to be done, this has to be done. And we didn't have riots in Bihar. We were very, very, very lucky during that time.
Ma'am, very often we see that the depiction of the police forces in media and in movies is very different from my takeaway of the book. Because when I read the book, I see a very hardworking, honest, hands-on officer. And I honestly feel there's very little time to even think and operate on the basis of corruption. But what we see is a very exaggerated form, and that's the common consensus and perception that, there's a lot of corruption within the system. So you feel that it's an exaggerated portrayal, or is there genuinely corruption within the system?
No, some of them in the cinemas and movies and all, I think that over the ages, police has been portrayed as a buffoon, as a person who's pot-bellied and who doesn't know anything, and the butt end of all kinds of jokes and all kinds of barbs against him. But there is another side of the police, and if that police was not existing in the country, we would not be holding the country together. I mean, people can sleep in their homes only because the police is out patrolling. You can complain that in spite of the police patrolling, there is a burglary happening. It may happen out of 500 homes, one home mein burglary ho sakta hai. But you look at the other side. You look at the way we have handled Kashmir. So many men we have lost there. I mean, it's pathetic that the way, but we have still not given up Kashmir. We have held on to it. Similarly, in the northeast, we've been attacked so many times with so many different groups. But it's the police which is defending. The terrorist attacks which have taken place. I remember I was posted in the CRPF in Delhi. Those days, every time there was a 15th August, 26th January, Parliament is opening, the whole city was be clamped down. There will be so much of tension because of these things happening. But yes, the police did rise up to the occasion. So I feel that social media has not been very fair. But of late, I think that the movies and all are depicting other aspects of the police, some better performance of the police, and what is the life they are leading. I see it on the OTT platforms and all, that the police is now being portrayed in a better light.
Absolutely. I cannot culminate this discussion before asking you that what is your motivation behind the title, Madam Sir? It is such an intriguing title. It stands out. It speaks of power. It speaks of resilience. It speaks of paradox. It speaks of everything. So what was your motivation, and how did you arrive at this title?
I've written about it in the book that when I arrived in Bihar, it was always sir, sir, sir. If anything, we would say sir. For every conversation with subordinates or with your driver or your bodyguard, or if you went to the police station with the officer in charge, sir, sir, and they don't even say yes and no, they keep saying sir, sir. And the officers here, they know how it is. After some time, I think they realized that there was something wrong in addressing me as a sir, because I am one person who's very feminine and I do wear a sari. Though I'm in uniform the whole day, in the evening and all, I like to wear a sari. I don't, I'm not always in a pant and shirt, as now many girls I found, lady officers, do wear a t-shirt and pant or something casual in the evening. But I was not brought up like that. I was brought up very conservatively. So then I think they realized that there is something wrong and they just added madam to it. So, वो madam sir वहाँ से आ गया. And when I was writing this book was written only because my brother was so keen that I record my story. So he was, I have a brother who's almost 14 years younger than me. So he says that when he was growing up and I was in the police, this seeing me called Madam Sir, even he could not fathom what was this, Madam Sir. So when I was writing, so he selected the title. He said, you should put the book as Madam Sir and nothing else, because this is what I remember you as. So that's how Madam Sir has come. And one interesting last anecdote, I would say that after this book was published, a lady officer rang me up from some place. I've never met her. She introduced herself. And she said, Madam, I read your book and I really enjoyed. I read it non-stop. And I must tell you that for the sacrifices you people made, now we are not Madam, sir, we are just Madam. So I said, we've come a long way. We've come a long way.
Thank you so much, Manjari ji, for being in conversation with us. It's been an absolute honor. Your journey is so inspiring, and there is just so much to take away from the book. And now I'm going to open it up to the audience. I'm sure everybody is very curious and eager to ask questions. So we'll open.
Hello. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, they say behind every successful man, there's a woman. I know behind every successful woman, there has to be a man. And I just heard from Anuji, who's also your relative, that your husband was extremely supportive to you. Now, I wanted to ask you, for the young girls who want to come join the forces, the police forces, if they don't have that kind of support, does the police have something like, or young mothers having creche or something? What kind of support do they get?
So life in the IPS is very, for an IPS officer, is very different from other ranks in the police. They have, I think, tougher lives because they have fixed hours of duty, 8 hours, and that might extend to 10 hours, 12 hours. We have officers here from the CISF who are at the airports, who are guarding public sector undertakings. They are working with women. And earlier there were no benefits available, no facilities available. There were no basic facilities were not available for women officers. So I think that for the women IPS officers, they do have help. And even if they don't have help, many people ask me that how did you manage? I think that why women IPS officers, any officer or a person who's taken up a career, should go out and seek help. You can't live in isolation and you're trying to bring up your children. You must have a support system. And that support system could be friends who, if you're out in the night or you're not there, then they're there. Or take help, help from the local women or men as you feel this thing, as you feel is appropriate. If they are boys, they are girls. So help is important and support is important. And I find many people have their nose up in the air. हम help नहीं मांगेंगे, हम अपने सास को कुछ नहीं बोलेंगे, अपने mother को नहीं बुलाएंगे. But I don't advocate that. I think that when you need help, you should reach out to people, and that is the only way you can handle a career. I very often talk to other bank officers or in other book events, and they say, how did you manage a family and your work? Because our work is 24/7. I'm feeding my child and a wireless message comes, डकैती हो रहा है शहर में, then I can't say कि अब हम इसको खिला लेंगे तब हम जाएंगे. I have to drop that spoon and give it to somebody, feed him and go for that case. So in those situations, I had a very good maid for 32 years. I've written very extensively about her. So she would handle. So I think that becomes very important, to look for somebody whom you can rely on. And that is a very important aspect of a very important aspect for a woman to work. I have two daughter-in-laws who are also working. I always encourage them that have a person in the family, I mean, have a help 24 by 7, even if you have to keep 2 or 3. But you please do your job and let her handle the home. Unless your home is settled, I don't think a woman can really give her best to the job. That thing that the children are coming from school, breakfast, lunch mila ki nahi, whether the khana has been cooked or not for the night, if you have in-laws staying with them, then whether their things have been taken. So it's always good to reach out. And there were times when I was in the district, I would reach out to my neighbors. Suppose my husband was posted somewhere else, and I was all alone, and sometimes I had to go out in the night or 2 days out. Then I would request my neighbors to just keep an eye. Just keep an eye. So all these things you have to reach out. I also heard Arundhati Bhattacharya, the chief of SBI, and she was sharing her experience, and she said exactly the same. She says, we have our nose up in the air and we don't seek help, but it is always good for women to seek help from neighbors, friends, colleagues, and people will come to help you.
Thank you so much.
This is a slight personal question. How did you meet your husband?
My husband should get up and show him. He's the person behind me, as you said. I met him at the police academy. We were colleagues there. And it worked out. No, they had no say. They only approved. We decided and they approved.
Okay, I have one question. So, in your whole life, people might ask you what is the toughest and challenge of your life. But I want to know what's the top moment of your life where you feel happy, you feel joy, you feel this is the moment I have prepared myself. You feel complete or satisfied in your professional and personal, and it can be anything.
No, in the professional life, the day I qualified for the IPS, I felt that I had achieved a lot.
Yeah.
That is the day I achieved a lot. But what I would say was really difficult for me in my personal life was when the children had to leave home and go to college. Those days, that I have found very tough to accept, because I have two boys and they had to go out. So when they would leave the home for days, I would cry and just calculate the days I would see them in a year. And that was very challenging. And it would so happen that my mother would often say that you're a woman officer, put the children in the hostel. I never put them in the hostel because I always felt that they would be home from the hostel and I would be away on some meeting. And sure enough, my elder son, when he first went to the hostel and when he came home for the first time, I was in Delhi for a meeting in the CISF. So these things happen, but I think those were challenging times when the children finally leave the home.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am. I would like to ask that what is your idea about feminism? और जो आज की young girls हैं, उनके लिए आप कोई specific message देना चाहें?
हम young women को बोलना चाहते हैं कि they should not give up. I find that women are too easy. थोड़ा सा प्रॉब्लम हुआ, अच्छा छोड़ देते हैं नौकरी. अब हमारे हस्बैंड ऐसे बोल रहे हैं, मेरे इन लॉज और सुन नहीं रहे मेरा बात, आई शुड लीव माई जॉब. A woman has struggled so much to come to that level. My message is that हर चीज़ के लिए एक solution निकलता है, और we should not always be in a hurry to chuck up something. Our emphasis should be to make things work. You are a woman, you can work in a collective, get people together, you can nurture, you can build trust in the family. So I feel those qualities are very important for a woman to move ahead in life. Trust hona chahiye, family should trust you and you should trust them, and you should reach out to everybody to move ahead. So gender prejudice is going to be there. Please don't think that there is no gender prejudice. There will be gender prejudice, but you have to handle that prejudice.
Thank you, ma'am.
Your story is very inspiring, very, very beautiful.
Thank
Did
you.
you got any call ever from any producer they want to make movie on your book?
My family has been all, friends have been all saying that you should make a movie, you should make a movie. And I do get calls. I will be frank with you, I have got calls. But I am not very good at taking decisions about it because I don't know about social media. So I am asking my brother only to decide. And he says that when we get a good producer or whatever he thinks is important, because he's also into media. So I said that he will decide, I think.
Yeah, so he's a 14-year younger to you.
14.
So for the next generation.
Ah.
So you should decide soon. Don't take much time because because this world is waiting to see what you have done.
Thank you so
Welcome.
much. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask a last question? Hi. Yeah. After retirement, what are the few things that you're enjoying doing?
After retirement, I have really not retired.
Okay.
Because
From the job.
Sudeep and Kajla here, they will know. Soon after I retired, people started asking me, what are you going to do next? I said, I'm going to work. I told everybody that I'm going to work. And it so happened that I was offered jobs immediately and I took up the job. One was with TCS as a senior advisor. And then with Mr. Julius Ribeiro in his company called the Indian Music Industry for Piracy of Music, Anti-Piracy of Music. And then continuously I have worked. I have still, I'm happy that I have not retired because I feel there is so much more to do, left to do.
Amazing, amazing.
I'll just take a minute. I first came to work with ma'am in
Please
1990.
tell them who you are, Kajla.
Yeah, okay. I'm Vinay Kajla. I'm DIG in CISF and presently looking after the North Zone airports, which from JNK, UP, Rajasthan. So other than Delhi, the 19 airports. And I've just joined this month on 3rd of June. And my baptism into airport sector happened on the 6th when Kulvinder decided to give Kangana what she, more than a peck on the cheek. She, in fact, when I asked, I apologized to Kangana ma'am. I said, we're very sorry about what happened. And then I asked Kulvinder, what spurred you into doing this? She said that was the statement then that she gave out, and I felt very aghast at how could somebody say this thing about protest. So I said, but slapping is not the answer. I mean, Mark Twain had said, when angry, count till 4. When very angry, swear. So गाली देना ठीक था, पर थप्पड़ मारने की क्या जरूरत थी? बोलती थप्पड़ मार के बहुत शांति अनुभूति हो. So there's another quote of Mark Twain that it takes 2 years to learn to speak, but it takes a lifetime to learn what not to speak. And that I think Miss Kangana needs to learn. The ma'am's presence, I joined headquarters in 99 because ma'am pulled me out from Barauni. I was in the wilderness in Bihar. I got to do the IT computerization and so many projects with ma'am. And in fact, you don't know this, but the airport security, we were virtually, CISF was getting merged into CRPF. And Dr. Trinath Mishra was our DG then. And one day, he came in the lift with me downstairs. He used to have a grievance room every Friday. And he said, you know, CISF merge ho raha hai. You can go to the private sector. So I came back home and then I told my wife that this is what the DG is saying. So she says, who is DG to decide the future of CISF? You go continue work. So she was just married for 2 years, but I credit her with this vision because that very next week, we got this presentation to do to the aviation secretary of why CISF should be inducted into airports. The BCAs wanted their own force, the Civil Aviation Security Force. And what the argument, ma'am, was that we have a force which we can circulate around the rest of the country. We can go into oil, we can go into nuclear, we can push the young people into aviation and then take them out after 10 years and push them elsewhere. And that's what got us the airports. Madrid bombing got us the metro. So something keeps happening. Somebody takes a grenade or a smoke thing in a thing and we got the parliament. So So ma'am's time with CISF has given us a lot of pleasure and joy. So if I say, you have seen a movie called An Officer and a Gentleman, but when you see her, you see an officer and a gentle lady, and the beauty of hers, 1999 to 2024, she hasn't changed. So if I want to see that biopic, I want to see ma'am acting. she can still pull it off. I'm so grateful that she called me here today to be with all of you. Anytime, any airport, you need any help, please feel free.
A big heartfelt gratitude. I had one question of my own, but I think I will take it up separately as we are running out of time. What a delightful conversation. What a unbelievably enthralling talk. We could keep listening to you time and time over. I also extend my gratitude towards the conversationalist Ehsaas Women of Agra, Mrs. Chandni Chopra, for this conversation, and our sincerest thanks to each one of you for being a part of this enriching experience. I would also like to thank our association with the Cannot for their beautiful space and support as always. Special mention to Sai Shinjini Academy of Fine Arts and Culture for their association. I would also like to thank our media partner for today, Dainik Jagran, and all the Ehsaas women for their support. This show would have been nothing without your enthusiastic participation, engaging questions, and the lively banter that has filled the room. Your presence added a touch of stardust to an already luminous gathering, making it a night to remember. Prabha Khaitan Foundation promotes cross-state cultural understanding and appreciation. We promote local artists, their artifacts to show appreciation to our patrons and guests by endorsing their projects. We encourage all to buy local products from local craftsmen in their sustainability and development. At all our events, local food is served, which means spreading awareness about more locally grown produce in the city and community. In this context, today we are pleased to felicitate our guest with an ethnic handloom stole. I would request Ehsaas Women of Indore, Unnati Singh ji, to kindly come forward and felicitate our author. To all our guests, please feel free to grab a complimentary copy of Manjari Jaruharji's book and get it autographed by the dynamic woman herself. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Prabha Khaitan Foundation, Chandni and Chetna, for everything. It was really nice.